Welcome, everyone. I'm Angelo Robles, founder at Family Office Association and host of the Angelo Robles podcast. Today, we're going to cover Bitcoin, a personal discovery. It features Natalie Brunell, founder and host of the Coin Story podcast. I became familiar with Natalie a couple of months ago when I started to follow her Twitter feed. She's very popular on Twitter. I love her writing and enjoy the work that she's done. We're probably not going to agree on everything, and that's a good thing. Hopefully, I'll have a chance to learn. Natalie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Angelo, for having me. Excited to be here.
Thank you. The pleasure's mine. What I really enjoyed about you, and this is normally not a question that I really ask people, but you have and I use that word, a personal discovery. You went from being a journalist to being active with someone on TV to really kind of leaving that behind and being 100% dedicated to your passion and your belief in Bitcoin. I'd love to hear a little bit about that personal journey.
Sure. So yes, I was a broadcast television journalist for more than 10 years. It was a very rewarding and fulfilling experience and profession. I've learned so much about so many different topics and aspects of life. And I've been able to cover some of the biggest problems facing our country over the last decade. And I've moved around. I've traveled the country doing news. I've worked for some great networks. And I think that over the last 5 years, especially or so, I felt like I saw our country getting more and more divided. And I saw the problems that we face kind of ballooning and getting worse and worse, even though we seemingly were pouring more and more public money on it. And then people do have, I think, really great intentions, right? Everyone wants to help people, especially people who are at the bottom who need the most help. And politicians all come in with their promises. But at the end of the day, I was covering a lot of the same things over and over and over again. The problems were not getting better. They were actually getting worse. And it wasn't until I learned about Bitcoin and really how our monetary system is broken and how our economy functions, only then did I understand that money was really at the root of all of these problems. I connected the dots and I tried to, I finally saw hope in Bitcoin. Bitcoin offered us the chance to return to a system that was based on more equality and value, where the government could not manipulate things like interest rates, and they couldn't just print money whenever they wanted and expand the money supply, which reduces the power of each of your dollars. And I became so inspired because I started to feel like instead of being some jaded reporter who was going to be covering the worst crises of humanity over and over and over again, to being someone who believes that this technology could actually be disruptive and change lives and bring about the ability to create generational wealth. And I became inspired and wanted to leave, and I wanted to spread the awareness because it's such a hard topic to understand. We don't have great financial literacy education. And I think that we need to get the message out to the general public. The mainstream media needs to become educated on Bitcoin and how it can solve these problems. So long story short, I decided to dedicate my career to spreading the word.
For sure. I think sometimes when we're in the community and we're active on Twitter, we think that everyone is like an expert. The reality is, I'm not even sure if 1% of family offices, multifamily offices, RIA really have fluidity in what I would call more broadly than you, and we'll get to that, but digital assets. So you're correct. I think that's a very valuable service, and kudos to you for kind of giving up a successful career. You were probably on the rise for something that was really of your purpose and passion. How do you define, I could give a simple definition, but how do you define Bitcoin? To me, it could be sound money and money, but I probably look more at it as digital gold, as a store of value. What does it mean to you?
Yes, I would agree with you. I see it as a digital savings technology, and I'm really attracted.
I like that.
I'm really impressed and attracted to the idea that someone or people, whoever Satoshi Nakamoto may be, brilliantly programmed and created digital scarcity for the first time. We've literally never had a monetary asset that can't be just expanded and has a completely finite supply that once it's mined, there can be no more Bitcoins created. And I think that when you look back on history and start to study kind of the rise and fall of different government systems and empires and different countries, when you peel back the layers of money and how currency ultimately was always debased and how the power and the prerogative to manipulate the money supply, politicians have always taken advantage of because it's just too tempting of a power, right? It's really led to the collapse. Yeah, it's really led to the collapse of a lot of, different, societies over time. And I just think that it's important to look at history as a lesson and see how I think that we had one of the greatest times of human flourishment under the gold standard, where I think we were closest to that sense of capitalism and free markets, and people were allowed to kind of contribute value based on supply and demand. And we created some of the inventions that affect all of our lives to this day. And then we sort of allowed government to take too much power. And now we're 50 years past being officially taken off the gold standard. Wealth inequality is more severe and extreme than it's ever been. And yet we have this mirage, this like imaginary wealth, because everyone sort of lives on credit. And we've convinced the American public that the health of our economy is based on how much we spend as opposed to how much we save. And we reward people for taking out debt. And I just think that things are so backwards right now. We don't even know what capitalism is in this country anymore. We certainly don't reward it. We don't appreciate it. We blame capitalism for the things that government is creating. And I think we need to open people's eyes to how things actually work and why there are all these problems, and how something like Bitcoin and assets that can't be controlled or manipulated or influenced by the government, how they can bring about individual sovereignty and freedom and allow someone to really improve their lot in life in a more fair, equitable way, as opposed to the system that we're in now.
No, certainly very well said. When you mentioned Satoshi, I was chuckling. I've said a couple of times, I believe it's not one, it's probably a couple of what I call female cyberpunks. How about that perspective?
I would love that. I would love that. I hope so.
It's never probably what you expect it to be.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing, and that's the charm of it. They're not looking, I guess you could say, in the right places. Mm-hmm. You did say something that I think is important before we dive deeper into Bitcoin and somewhat more broadly digital assets, kind of what led us to this. And although we could do hours and hours on this, and trust me, you ask Michael Saylor this question, it is going to be about 2 hours. So we'll try to do the 3 or 4 minute version. It's the Fed, our central bank. Like you said, they could print money like there's no tomorrow. Now, COVID came along and that was incredibly accelerated. We're going to have to pay for this. This is not just going to go away. We have a massive deficit. We have significant inflation, well above what the CPI is reporting. And by the way, if you wanted to buy more Bitcoin, it went up like 354% in the last 12 months. I can make the argument from an asset inflation perspective, you would have to get that level of return to keep on kind of quote unquote buying more and staying status quo. Maybe walk us through a little bit of the failure of MMT, of printing money, and what led us to our tough situation now.
Yeah, so I think a lot of this started as these incremental changes that now you look back on the last several decades, and we've done this to ourselves by creating moral hazards and bubbles that affect the people at the bottom and middle of our society the most, which is, I think, what's most sad, because politicians come in with sort of these well-intentioned plans and policies, but ultimately these free lunches and these stimulus that they promise people, it hurts the very people who are on fixed incomes and the people who are the so-called middle class. We went from having a middle class who in the 1970s, the US aggregate income, most of it came from the middle class. It was in the 60%. And now it's in the 40%. And the upper class represented about 8 or 9% of US aggregate income. Now they're up to almost half. I mean, we're literally like changing the structure of our society here in the country and who has the money and power, which is really, really sad. And so I think that we created first um, a bubble with the .coms in the 90s. And then I think we printed more money and we encouraged people to take out, loans and mortgages. And we created the housing bubble, which ultimately popped. And now we've created a US Treasury bubble that was exacerbated by the pandemic and the amount of liquidity that they injected into the market so fast in order to quote unquote cure the problem. At the end of the day, when you really think about it, we shouldn't have been in an economy and in a state where we are so reliant on the government stepping in to hand us these $1,200 checks. We should have savings accounts that are full of money, right? I mean, this is America. We shouldn't exist on debt. And yet I think people don't realize just how leveraged we are. And the debt ceiling is just this imaginary number now that seems to not matter to most people. Like they think, oh, well, we're the dollar, America's the superpower. It doesn't really matter. Well, it does matter because we're taking out debt and we're paying our debt with more debt. And when we print money, there's something called the Cantillon effect that, most people don't really know or understand, which is that the money goes to the most creditworthy entities, which are the corporations and the wealthy individuals, and they do their stock buybacks and they buy real estate. And so what do you see? You see asset bubbles. You see the real estate at all-time highs that are not based on price to earnings. You see the real estate at an all-time high with median home prices shooting up 24% in 1 year. And you see something referred to as the SAR, SAAR. It refers to the amount of personal income that is provided by government handouts or government payments to individuals and families. We went from having a SAR of 5% in the 60s to 31% after the pandemic. Nearly 1/3 of personal income is coming from the government. We're basically handicapping people and then making them reliant on the government. We're giving them the crutch after we've hurt them. It's just ridiculous, the system that we've created. The Fed was never supposed to have the amount of power and influence that it does. It at one point never was even allowed to own government bonds. And now it's basically manipulating interest rates and injecting money into the economy that's pooling with the top 5 to 10%. And it's exacerbating wealth inequality. And that's why people are hurting and feeling it and why everything's getting more expensive. So we need to nip that in the bud. And it's going to be painful because we've allowed the bubble to get so big. But the only thing that will fix it is popping the bubble or opting out and going to a financial system like Bitcoin, where you don't even care what fiat is doing anymore, in a sense, because on one hand, you're going to go to hyperinflation, and on the other, you're going to experience a massive crash. And that's really what the Fed is stuck between right now. It's a rock and a hard place.
They are, for sure. And unfortunately, the politicians that we elect on both sides, seem to constantly let us down. They're pushing down the road the inevitable problem effectively to avoid it now in their own reelection. To give the audience a little bit of context, if you invested in Bitcoin 10 years ago, over this 10-year period, it's believed to have been the greatest performing asset of all time. To put it another way that I think even hits me harder, during that same time, if you were to put 99 cents out of every dollar into the dollar, nothing, and 1% into Bitcoin, admittingly 10 years ago when it was very low, I get it. I'm skewing it to my favor, and probably Natalie's too. That 1% in Bitcoin and 99% in cash would have outperformed in that 10-year period any other asset class. Now, I'm not saying it's going to do that ratio and percentage moving forward. So that's Angelo's disclaimer. But I think that's pretty amazing when you look at it that way. And as I said earlier, and completely agree with Michael Saylor, there's no way inflation, especially for those that are super rich, is anywhere near 5%, not even factoring asset class inflation, which may be hundreds of percent from the perspective I gave earlier. It still is 15, 20, 25%. They want to buy more stocks, more art, houses, Malibu, Hamptons, Tokyo, New York. Now, yeah, I'm talking the top 1/10 of 1%. I get it. But it's their purchasing power is being horrifically eroded. And I don't even think they even know what's happening. A lot of them, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think that the sort of asset inflation that we're seeing with the stock market and housing bubbles, that does really help the people who have those types of assets, right? So it helps their portfolios. And
For sure.
sellers of that real estate. This is a great time to be a seller, right? But again, it's like we're giving the advantage to the people at the top of society, and then the politicians are coming out and saying, oh, well, now tax the rich. Well, you guys created the problem, right? And you're absolutely right that over the last decade, Bitcoin is the best performing monetary asset. It appreciated in the last 10 years about 1,000,000%. The next best is Tesla at 15,000 or so percent. I think it's a little bit more now with the new highs. Down below that, we have Apple and Amazon around 1,500%, the S&P 330%, and you have the US dollar basically collapsing in value. So, the numbers kind of speak for themselves. I know we have these meme coins that pop up here and there, and oh my gosh, it surged 40,000% in a day.
I will be talking about them.
So it requires you to sort of time the market. But look, Angelo, I'm a big believer that, in this country, most people don't want to have to sit and watch the stock market and become day traders on top of their normal job. But that's what we've come to. And it's actually there's a scary comparison to Weimar Republic, where people were speculating on the stock market back then, and they had their own sort of versions of meme stocks or meme coins because people were just trying to beat inflation. And right now we kind of see sort of that rebellion and that desperation of like, I want to just make money. And if I have to trade it and risk it on the stock market with the free money that you sent me from the Fed, I'm going to do that. And it just goes to show that our system is so broken that a person should just have a job and be able to put their money away and save for their family and take care of their family. This is the United States of America. Like, it's ridiculous where we're headed right now. So
for sure. And now, we mentioned earlier that Bitcoin is several things. We probably both agree, at least to me personally, more of digital gold and a store of value. But I do see how, yes, of course, I could use it from a monetary perspective. One, why would I want to? It's going up so much, like spending it comparative to other assets seems to make no sense. But ignoring that, on a larger scale, is it relatively too slow and too expensive? You're probably going to mention the Lightning Network, and we'll certainly get to that. But that is going to be a big picture question. If it were to grow and more El Salvadors come on, institutional investors come on, we potentially look at it utilizing it as money. What is going to make it be able to process more? Is the answer the Lightning Network, or is that layer 2 potentially a security risk?
No, I think that there are really great advancements happening in the Lightning Network. And I really do think that that will empower Bitcoin to be able to scale and have faster transactions. I agree with you, though, that most people, most Bitcoiners are big hodlers. They don't want to spend their Bitcoin. But here and there, it's also actually really great to use that technology and to see that it works and to encourage other people to adopt the system because of how easy it is to use it. And I think that, between the Cash App and sort of like Twitter tips, they're sort of moving into making it kind of easy and cool to be able to transact very quickly with Bitcoin or to be paid in Bitcoin. So I think the movement is happening. I think we're on our way to mass adoption. In terms of the numbers, if you compare Bitcoin adoption to the internet in the 90s, we're adopting much, much faster. This is like internet 1997, but ramped up. And I think we're going to have 1 billion users by 2025, but we still represent, such a small slice of the M2 money supply. The M2 money supply is, I think, estimated around 400 trillion around the world. At 1 trillion market cap, Bitcoin is such a baby right now. It's just tiny. And so we have a long way to go. That's why I think it's so interesting when people say, well, it's too late, I'm too late, it's too expensive, because I think people can't wrap their head around the fact that something could be $60,000 right now and still be early. And a lot of people don't realize that you can buy just tiny fractions of it. And so I almost compare it to like owning plots of digital real estate. And I know Michael Saylor's also kind of a fan of the idea of just sort of digital property and returning property rights to people that are, that can't be manipulated or controlled or affected by any third party, authority, or government. And so I think that's very attractive to people, this sense of what if you were buying real estate, in New York in 1900? Like, if you had the chance to do that, wouldn't you take that opportunity if you could get a tiny slice or a portion of land there? Well, you probably would, looking back, knowing how valuable that land became. And so I sort of see, Bitcoin as these sort of 21 million plots of digital real estate, digital property. And And that can be further divided into 100 million subplots, which is really, really exciting. So I think that adoption is coming. I think the Lightning Network will help us scale. I think in other countries that are developing nations or more impoverished, or where there are authoritarian governments, it makes more sense to use Bitcoin as not just a store of value, but as a medium of exchange to sort of subvert those oppressive governments. And so I think that that really empowers people and allows them to have a tool for human rights. People fleeing countries and borders, they now aren't limited to whatever the government allows them to bring out of the bank. They're limited to whatever they can put on their hard drive, which is pretty much infinity, right? So I just think it's so empowering from a global perspective. Here in the US, I think most people do use it as a store of value. In other places, they're already using it as a unit of account and medium of exchange. And I think all of it is just so powerful and so inspiring. And I think it's going to move us into a new financial revolution.
I mean, I guess it works for El Salvador. We're a much, much, much bigger country. But I guess I could make the argument, is Bitcoin too volatile today to be a reserve currency for a country? Let's not even say the US, whatever, country number 5 through 15.
I mean, I don't think so, because I see a global reserve currency as being something that you hold on to, right, for a long time. This isn't something where you put in Bitcoin to cash out 2 weeks later or 1 year later. This is a long-term investment that you will see grow. And if you look at the logarithmic chart that we talked about, the performance of the asset over the last 10 years, well, no one who has held Bitcoin for at least 4 years has lost money on it. It's just literally if you bought Bitcoin at any point in those 10 years and held for at least 4 years, you are in the green. So I think it's actually a fantastic global reserve currency, because instead of going into debt and worrying about printing money or having to tax your citizens, you are literally making money on your money. Isn't that the best kind of money?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so I think it's actually really empowering. I think the volatility will minimize the more that we grow. And I think the volatility right now, it's monetization happening in real time. It took thousands of years for gold to become money. We're doing that at lightning speed, no pun intended, for Bitcoin. And so I'm not worried about the volatility in the short term, because again, I don't think anyone should put money into Bitcoin who's looking to take it out in 10 days and trying to time the market. That's not what this is for. Right. It's meant as a long-term investment to protect the value and the monetary energy of what you earn.
Whenever, probably, I know it happens to me, I'm sure it happens to you, when we're in let's call it a debate, and it may be someone that we both know, like a Peter Schiff or someone like that, we're going to get pounded on no intrinsic value, no intrinsic value, no intrinsic value. I kind of have an answer for it, but I want to hear yours. What do you say when you're confronted with that?
I mean, I think that the value of Bitcoin is a distributed network that is essentially bomb-proof around the entire world, which is as strong as the internet. You can shut down the internet in one part of the world, and guess what? It's going to function everywhere else. I mean, you cannot take this thing down. Nation states have tried to ban it and bring it down, and the network rebounded, and it was just as resilient as ever. And I think it's so incredibly powerful and inspiring that now we're reestablishing ourselves in the West, with the mining moving mainly to North America, and being able to set sort of a precedent for other countries to follow suit. I really hope that US regulators, make the right decisions on it based on education and taking the time to learn about it. So, the intrinsic value thing as well. One thing that I was talking about with Peter Schiff is we live in a digital world. We're moving into a digital age where pretty much we're going to have versions of ourselves, digital identities that are functioning in some sort of metaverse, right? For sure. That's just, most people are not transacting in cash anymore. And Bitcoin not only gives you sort of the power of cash, right? Where it's like, it's a finality of settlement. It's an immutable ledger, just as if I handed you $5 from here to there, but now I can do it literally across the world and it settles immediately and no third party was involved. That's the power of cash. That's the value of cash. That's incredible. As for something physical, well, I'm pretty sure that Peter Schiff does not have a bunch of gold bars just sitting in his house that he uses to transact.
Let's go to his house then.
Right? A lot of people are investing in, physical things like gold through ETFs. A lot of people own stocks. Is a stock actually physical? Well, not really. So I think the physical argument is just, it's not one that carries a lot of clout for me. And I also think that something like the internet or even email, it transformed the way that we communicate with one another, right? I mean, what's the intrinsic value of an email? Well, it allows you to save time and to send information through time and space so that you can immediately converse with someone across the world. Well, Bitcoin does the same thing, but just with monetary value. It allows you to send monetary value and energy not only from one place to another, but into the future. I think you're sending that value to yourself in the future. So I think it's really incredible. I think the physical argument is just one of people that haven't done their homework on it and just maybe are a little bit old school.
Let's talk a little bit. Bitcoin's been around for 12, 13 years. It's had 3 periods around the halving cycle, approximately 440 days prior. We won't bore the audience with a detail of the halving cycle. Look it up if you don't already know. But the bigger picture is it fell and it fell hard. However, the floor got raised each time. I actually look at it as, and Peter Schiff has brought this up as a negative, it's only 12 years old, only 12 years old. It's been actually tested by going down so much, likely due to the halving cycle that has a long-term purpose and has bounced back bigger and better than ever all the time. Here's my question for you, and it's a crystal ball. So I heard Plan B on a couple of podcasts recently. I had him on 5 or 6 months ago, or I should have asked him this question. It looks like he is predicting that he goes, all I have to go by is history. We're probably going to have another big crash. Now, I could also state that he's doing some work now that could allow him to potentially benefit from, if it were to go down, he has some strategies to potentially, hedge your risk. Let's call it that. And nothing wrong with that. We're all capitalists. It's all good. So my big picture question is, do you think likely sometime next year, possibly also spurred by Tether and what could happen there, that we're inevitably going to have another winter relatively soon?
I'm not sure about relatively soon. I do think that we're going to have volatility. We're going to have bull and bear markets. And I think a lot of it, in my personal opinion, hinges on what the Fed is going to do over the next 2 years. And what I mean by that is, again, we're sort of between a rock and a hard place where the Fed has to either decide to keep printing money and inflating all the assets and making everything around us more expensive, or the Fed has to do the right thing and pull Volcker and hike interest rates. And they would need to hike them to a significant degree to shake out some of the leverage that we have in the system and to pull money off the balance sheet and finally taper, which is long overdue. Unfortunately, if they do decide to do that, the market will crash. And I think people will liquidate whatever they can. Right. And Bitcoin, a lot of people who are new to the space, right, they don't realize how liquid Bitcoin is, but it's very easy to sell off quickly if you need to. So I think that we could have a crash. It kind of depends, I think, on what happens over the next few years. I think inflation and monetary policy at the federal level will dictate some of that. We're going towards negative interest rates, and I don't know how sustainable that is. I think the Fed will basically have inflation run away from them, and they'll have to admit that it's not transitory or that it's much worse than they thought.
Exactly.
I think that will affect the markets in general. So I think it's possible that a big crash will happen. Do I think a major like Bitcoin winter will happen without something that is happening with the actual legacy financial markets? I don't really see what would prompt that. I know that people are scared of the regulation or bans, but I think it was a really positive move forward. The fact that the SEC approved an ETF. Gary Gensler has been pretty friendly toward Bitcoin, not necessarily the other cryptocurrencies.
I agree.
I think we're actually pretty lucky to have him and his knowledge in his position. And I think, US bank regulators signaling that they're looking at how traditional banks could potentially hold Bitcoin is also a very bullish sign. So
For sure.
I don't really see that we would have a drawback that would be like 70, 80% in Bitcoin. I think those days are behind us. Could it drop 40 to 50%? Sure. But I think by that time, we'll be maybe in the 6-figure range of Bitcoin, which means that we draw back to where we are right now, 50s, 60s. So I do think that we'll have volatility. I do think we'll have bull and bear markets, but I don't think that Bitcoin's going to go to zero or anything, too severe. I think a lot of it hinges on what the Fed's going to do.
I mean, if you look at the exponential growth, I think there's about 100 million wallets out there. Like you said, if that goes up to 1 million, which it's projected to do, if you just go by the growth that has occurred, there's likely to be, and an applicable increase in Bitcoin. And nothing's perfect, who knows, but it's probably as good as any in terms of an assumption. Wanted to say a little bit of a word here because lately this has happened to me. Kudos to Natalie, by the way. I don't know if it's questions that people are getting concerned about that I asked, but lately almost every guest is like, can I see the questions you're going to ask me before? Natalie's just so confident in her capabilities and didn't see probably my tough questions to Plan B and Michael Saylor. Like, it doesn't matter, just bring it on. So one, thank you for not what I would call chicking out and needing to see the questions to prepare for answers, or worse, tell me that I can't ask that question, which I hate, as you probably do as a host as well. What would cause you, this is always a tough one, what would cause you to change your mind about Bitcoin?
I mean, I really don't see it happening. I think that if we were in some imaginary world where Bitcoin all of a sudden collapsed to $1,000, I would try to be like, should I buy more or is this a bad sign? But again, it's just, that's like stating something like, I don't see that happening. That would be like me being asked, what would I do if all of a sudden the power grid went down in the entire country? What would I do? I mean, it's like, well, hopefully I would have some light bulbs, or some flashlights and, some food stored up. It's just, I don't see it as a realistic situation or probability. I don't really have concerns about Bitcoin. Like, I've done enough homework where I trust how it was programmed and how it was created. I trust the network. I don't think, a 51% attack is possible. I think that it's going to spur innovation in terms of just energy creation and moving us to renewables. I think we'll see a resurgence in possibly nuclear energy, because that has some really great potential for Bitcoin and creating the power needed for mining. I think it's a space that has some of the smartest people that I've ever met or ever read or ever, had the chance to meet. And I don't think that they're wrong about this. So I'm very confident, and hopefully I'm not overly confident, but I really truly believe this was a really well designed network and open protocol that didn't just come out of nowhere. I mean, literally Satoshi stood on, the shoulders of giants. This was like decades long in terms of research and development before it actually worked. And he was able to solve the double spending problem. And, just the genius by which this network was created, it just astonishes me. I think it's absolutely amazing. And so I don't see as like a point of failure or a situation where I would be like, it's time to get out.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing about decentralized is there should not be any quote unquote single point of failure. We won't bore the audience with the technical aspects of Bitcoin. Has never been hacked. It's proof of work. It is slower, yes, than say proof of stake. And we're not going to have the time today. If we had the 3 hours, we would, to really do a deeper dive across layer ones in the community. So, kudos. And I'm probably not as much of an advocate or a maximalist, nowhere near as Natalie, but it's good to hear that we agree. And that's going to change in a couple of minutes, but we agree on a couple of core things. Some of the challenges to Bitcoin, I think it is fair to bring it up. And yeah, the issue with the miners being in China really worried me. That is gone, I think. Unless it's some kind of misdirect and it goes back, a lot of them came here to the US. Now we're the world leader. So yeah, the issue of the 51% attack, I mean, technically you could cause power grids to go down in a big nation state attack. And for a little while, potentially, I think they could even do what's called a 39% type of attack, but that's like 1 in 1,000% chance to happen. Why I even brought it up, I have no damn idea. But I would say it's regulation. And I think you already addressed that. Again, we have limited time, so we're not going to dive too deeply. Actually, in my notes was electricity. Yeah, that would be a problem. Two that I would bring up, one meant to be a little tongue in cheek. Elon tweets, which actually I say that tongue in cheek, but short-term volatility, that does concern me. If I had to pick one, though, that's a little different than most, I'm going to go with the Satoshis, because it's likely more than one. The Satoshis being outed or surfacing. And there's a variety of reasons for that. But what would be some of the things that you maybe watch as a possible challenge to Bitcoin?
I don't think that Satoshi's identity actually matters, and I don't think that we'll ever know it. I think that they did a really great job covering their tracks because they're experts in operational security, which is wonderful. Yeah, it's really just what worries me is just making sure that politicians who are making decisions in Washington, D.C. and other places are educated on this, because the last thing I want is for people to be voting about a technology that they inherently don't understand because they haven't taken the time to educate themselves and they just buy into some narrative that they heard God knows where at this point. I think it's really important to keep Bitcoin bipartisan and to make sure that people regulate it in a fair, honest way. I think the whole community, the industry regulates sound, fair regulation that protects everybody, but nothing in the way of, government stepping in and trying to hurt the little guy once again. I think that right now we live in this crazy time where it's like $600 IRS requirements that, again, are not going to affect the billionaires. They're going to affect the average person. And unrealized capital gains tax. I mean, come on.
I was going to bring that up.
I saw a great tweet the other day on Halloween where someone was saying that they're going to eat 30% of their kids' Halloween candy and teach them what unrealized capital gains are.
That is a good one.
Yeah. So, I just think that some of the things they're throwing out, it's like they're throwing spaghetti on the wall and they're not admitting that the problem is themselves and the money printing situation that they've created, which is allowing money to go to the places that it is and allowing the billionaires to become even richer. And I just hope that they don't overtax it and they don't overregulate it. The tax thing is one thing that I know Michael Saylor talks about for sure. It's like, you don't tax something that is basically not even, you're not even taking it out of your account. You're not seeing that interest and that appreciation. You're leaving it in there. Why would you tax someone on income that they haven't received? I would like to tax all the politicians on all the unrealized promises. I want their speaking fees to have a 100% tax because they're getting richer and making all these decisions and the average person is losing out. And meanwhile, crypto is offering them the chance to make their own wealth on their time, on their own prerogative. And I think that that's what this country is supposed to be built on, is freedom to make decisions, to build your own wealth. So yeah, I just hope that they don't try to make moves without understanding what Bitcoin is.
For sure. And maybe a little comment on the regulatory part. I know there's going to be people, I'm a libertarian, I get it. They can't overly regulate or stop with Bitcoin. It doesn't have a single point of failure. It's open code. It's covered in the US Constitution, blah, blah, blah. Theoretically correct. There could be several cases, though, where that it's just not perfectly accurate. They completely control regulatory on and off ramps into Bitcoin and crypto. Luckily, although they appear to be a little slow moving on some things, like others in the community have spoken about, it would be a terrible thing for the US to close its door to this. If I was Canada or another country, I'd say, come on over. We'll give you amazing benefits. We would lose what makes America, America, and advantages we had in technology over the last 30 years. So I don't see that happening. I do get the feeling, the one negative comment, just like real estate gets taxed annually, and I had this conversation with Saylor and Plan B, I do think inevitably some level of a compromise, unfortunately, is going to be that there will be some sort of tax that would be similar to real estate happening to Bitcoin. I don't want it to happen, but if that keeps it all good and we pay, my problem with that is, okay, it starts at 1%, and what happens with all taxes? That starts to creep up. That's my problem with it.
Well, I agree. And I think, again, it's gonna send people out of our borders, which we don't want. We want the best and the brightest and the smartest people and the best innovators. And so I think that Bitcoin offers us a chance to return to a sense of fair, free markets, which drives competition, right? So if one state or one government's going to overtax you, guess what? You're going to have the freedom to move somewhere else and take your wealth and your ideas and your companies and your business completely elsewhere. And some people have done that, right? Like I am pretty sure, let's see, Peter Schiff went to, I think, Puerto Rico, or we have Raoul Pal in the Cayman Islands. I mean, people at the top have already been doing this. They've been moving their money offshore and trying to get away from all the regulation and taxes. And so I think that Bitcoin, if people want to move out because the government is just over regulating it or overtaxing it, they're certainly going to do that. And so I hope that the US makes smart decisions about this, the smartest decision would be to put it on its balance sheet and to stop continuing to just have this debt go spiraling out of control. I mean, we're paying our debt with more debt. Our US dollar is backed by debt and a powerful military, which is basically the threat that we will come after you and invade you with our powerful weapons. That's not an economy. I mean, that's not a monetary system that has the power to last into the future. And so yeah, I think Bitcoin can solve a lot of these problems. So I'm sure that they'll try to tax it, and I'm sure people will also leave if they try to do that too much.
Some will, and there's challenges to that, including an exit tax. Now, Puerto Rico would be one option within the US that has a very interesting tax treaty, but we'll save that for a different podcast. I would say maybe 3 more points we'll discuss, and then we'll take it to a close. And I think my audience would be interested in terms of what you're doing and how they could learn more about your intellect and how you could help accelerate their knowledge on Bitcoin and crypto. My audience is going to be mainly investors and family offices, so they're not quite in the trenches with terminologies like maximalist and all that. They don't care. For the most part, they want to make money and, I hope, do good in the world. Would you define yourself as a Bitcoin maximalist, or are you open-minded to other crypto and tokens, Ethereum, Solana? And how about things like DeFi and the metaverse and how this all interacts?
Yeah, so I'm certainly not a denier that we're going to move into a world where the metaverse is created and we have sort of digital identities and digital property and all of that. And I do think that Bitcoin will actually be the core technology that moves us into the digital age of saving. So I think that projects and applications will be built around these new technologies that are based on the blockchain as the sort of the backbone and the foundational layer. But I ultimately see Bitcoin as very different from a lot of those other projects and technologies. I see Bitcoin as money, as a store of value, as something that will continue to appreciate into the future and hopefully become a global reserve currency and a unit of account. And I see the other projects, including Ethereum and the other coins, as technology companies, some of which will have value and use and function, and they will survive and succeed and make people money. And some of them I think will fail. And some of them I think will lose people a lot of money. And so I think it's very important for people to do their homework and research. I know it's very, enticing to make a quick buck, and we are a society of instant gratification. So we want to become overnight millionaires. And that's super exciting that you can do that with something like a Squid Game coin, if you strike big. But, it's really important to just do your homework on where you're actually putting your money and your life savings. I'm a believer in free markets. So if you want to invest in other commodities, in other projects, in other cryptos, great, go for it. I personally am a Bitcoin maximalist in the sense that I want something that I can set and forget, that will help me plan for my retirement, that will allow my money to carry value into the future. And I don't want to have to time the market. I literally want to put it away and not think about it until I absolutely need to, and potentially in the future, maybe lend or borrow against it as it appreciates. So I don't see them as the same. I think it's important, again, to do your homework and to have education in the space. I think some of the things being created are fascinating. I think that Ethereum sort of built the pipes for the metaverse, and now Facebook is trying to create its own version. And I sort of see Facebook as like it's like the McDonald's of social media companies. So it's going to package the burger in a way that they can distribute it to the masses. So that's what I think they're trying to do with the metaverse personally. And so, I'm sure we'll have digital little avatars of ourselves doing weird things, but I'm not really a fan of that kind of world. But at the core, I think people should be able to protect the value of their money. And I think Bitcoin will allow them to do that. And it's the core disruptive technology behind all of this that will empower us to have a sense of, this global economy with a neutral currency that is based on value and supply and demand.
Before we get to a close in 5 minutes, probably 1 or 2 more questions. There were some comments in my text and chats that came in. If we had a 2-hour dialogue, yes, I would ask. So I'm going to leave a cliffhanger a little bit, Natalie. What happens when there's 21 million coins in 2140? Fair question. Did the NSA have an involvement in SHA-256 and possibly some involvement in Bitcoin? And is that concerning? I think those are fair questions. There's not necessarily a clear-cut answer. Perhaps you could divide into one camp or the other. And there are some interesting aspects that if we had a deeper chance, but why don't we save those for another time. I'm going to lighten things up a little bit, yet also try to keep a straight face when I'm doing this, Natalie. I'm really going to try. I am not a maximalist. I greatly respect and pay homage to Bitcoin really being the original, whoever the Satoshis, the ladies are, they're out there somewhere, you know who you are. And it definitely is a part of my holding and portfolio. When I am asked, what do I think will be around in 100 years, gold or Bitcoin? I think it is possible that long term, I'm going to shock everyone here. I'm not so sure that gold that long term is not going to be the winner. I'm damn well sure it's not going to be the winner over 5, 10, 15, 20 years. We'll save that a little bit for another time. I'm extremely active in digital assets, and I don't know who the winners are going to be. I'm assuming some of my holdings are going to go to shit. Some will underperform, some will slightly overperform, and I hope some do really great. Time will tell. I need a 10-year window because it's just way too volatile, even like you said, in the short term. What I would like to do before we get to a close with you is I should have labeled this Shiba Inu versus Bitcoin. How about that? It's too late because we're not covering enough of Shiba Inu. I'm going to take the Shiba Inu side in our little 3-minute mini debate. You're obviously going to take the Bitcoin side, which you already laid out, I think, a very strong case for. If you wanted to discuss your belief in Bitcoin and why, a quote unquote, a crypto like Shiba Inu is simply gambling, I'm all game to listen, but I'd like to share some insights that I have on Shiba Inu.
Great, do so.
Who goes first? How about you? Why should I forget Shiba Inu and only buy Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I think that it's important to look at that fixed monetary supply that's at the base layer of Bitcoin and the importance of having hard money in our society that allows us to plan for the future and lower our time preference. Right now, we are in an expansionary monetary supply, and we see inflation in real time with the US dollar and in lots of other currencies around the world. And Bitcoin is the exact opposite of that. It's the first time money was created that's actually deflationary, and the stock to flow number continues to go up as less and less Bitcoin are produced every single 4 years. So I think it's just a truly unique technology that we've never really had before. And so if you look at the monetary history over the last 10 years, which it's started to build up a foundation, it's been around for more than a decade, which is exciting. You see that its performance has outdone pretty much every other asset that exists right now. Something like a cryptocurrency that, you have 400 trillion coins in the supply, and some gets burned, and so each one becomes more valuable as you burn them, or something that can just in general be expanded or contracted at will by a central party or central group of people. That scares me a little bit, because what happens when basically you're off doing something and you haven't been checking the market for some reason, and now the sell-off has happened and you've lost half of your money that you've put in. That sort of thing really scares me. It has no purpose to become a monetary reserve currency, a store of value, a unit of account. I mean, there could be 400 trillion Shiba Inu coins tomorrow, and there could be 100 million the next day. And I think that it's scary to have something that can expand like that at will by someone or some people. So I don't see Shiba Inu as anything except for a meme token. I see it as a distraction, a flash in the pan that can create, an overnight millionaire in the same way a lottery ticket can, but it can cause also a lot of heartache. And I think it encourages people to basically make unsound decisions with their money because they're just trying to essentially make a quick buck, and they don't necessarily even believe in the underlying technology. So yeah, I see Bitcoin as the safe bet, whereas I see Shiba Inu as gambling in the casino.
I think that's a fair argument from your perspective. And I don't know, you may end up being right about that. My perspective, being a diverse investor, is I have lots of different opportunities that I invest in. Actually, most of them in the last year have done much better than Bitcoin, and some have done worse. Relative to what you noted about Shiba Inu, and hard for me to talk against Bitcoin because I am an advocate. But there's a couple of things that come to mind. 41 million%. I know that's going to be crazy for people to like, what are you talking about? Since it launched, August? So about 14, 15 months ago. Just incredible. You probably all heard the story about $8,000 going in over several weeks last summer, and how that, although they can't really get rid of it, but how that's what, about 5.6 billion now. I felt the same way. This is it's a meme coin. But then I looked into the community on Discord, and I'm talking a little bit of cyberpunk talk and all that now. The young people, I'll define that as Gen Z, that's a huge generation. How they internally feel relative to memes is very different than someone my age feels. And they're a big generation. A lot of them look at Bitcoin as being, that's an old coin, that's a boomer coin. I'm not saying I agree. I'm saying it's how they feel. Doge has what, 10 million people participating. Shiba Inu, I believe it's ballpark about 4 million. But here's the bigger points. They actually are doing stuff. If anything, it's almost like, something's a little weird here. I'll get to that in a second. But what they are doing, they literally are building out a swap program. It's already built. They have dropped NFTs. They're talking about gaming, things like Axie Infinity and how successful that's been. They've been so efficient, kind of, I would say, under promising and over delivering. It does make me wonder who the hell is behind this. What I mean by that is just like Bitcoin, it's an anon, an anonymous person or persons, Ryoshi, I believe it's pronounced. I'm not going to share my opinions, who that guess may be, at least not yet. I may share that in a future podcast. My bigger point is, potentially, is it worth taking 25 basis points, 75 basis points, 1%, and putting it into what I would call moonshot-like investments? If it goes to nothing, it goes to nothing. It relatively has very little impact on my portfolio. But it goes up exponentially, it has a tremendous impact. We should do a deeper discussion on that, but I do want to be respectful of your time, and really enjoyed and learned a lot from having you on today. How could my listeners, my viewers, how could they become more familiar with your work? How do you engage? Do you host masterclasses? How could they learn more?
Yeah, thanks so much. Well, before I get to that, I do want to just speak to that answer. You know, what's amazing about Bitcoin is now it's like this distributed global network that's backed up with proof of work, and it literally is reinforcing and storing $1 trillion worth of value around the world, and that supply again can't be expanded. I think that money today, and a lot of these new technologies that are rising, like the NFTs, money at the end of the day is a story. I think that it shines a spotlight on how we as human beings, we really relate to and are drawn to stories and a sense of community and tribalism. And I think cryptocurrencies are benefiting from that. It's this, again, sort of this mini rebellion from a very chaotic financial system that we find ourselves in, where we have to play different hands because we're just trying to make it and beat the big guy and beat inflation. And so I think we see this rise of like, NFTs are a story, meme coins are a story. Again, you get like empowered by that sense of community and a tribe, and even the, you know, the GameStop, AMC, Wall Street bets, we're going to get you, and we're going to get the man. I think that that's very powerful and can lead to people having value. And if we all decided to hand out monopoly money, right? I mean, we're handing it out, and if people want to transact in it and want to celebrate it, they're free to do that. But like, what's backing it? What's behind it? There is no distributed global network like there is with Bitcoin. So I think we're going to see kind of this like rise, this parabolic increase in any one of these meme coins. And then we're going to see it fall off, and people actually see the value of something like Bitcoin that's sort of at the base layer and ensures that your value is carried into the future. So I just think there's something very powerful about, yes, stories that can lead to trends or lead to things becoming popular, or, you know, supported by certain groups of people. But again, at the core, we all need money, and we all need money that can't be inflated. And we need money that government can't coerce us to have or to accept. I just think we need financial freedom. And that's why I'm so passionate about Bitcoin. But separately from that, I hope everyone checks out the Coin Stories podcast. I basically speak with the thought leaders in Bitcoin. Some contrarians like Peter Schiff as well have graced my show. So that's on YouTube and Apple Podcasts, Google Play, all that. I also teach Bitcoin. I teach Bitcoin fundamentals and the history of money. You can go to BTC bcforwomen.com or reach out to me directly. And I also take part in speaking engagements. So whether that's conferences or speaking to family offices, you can contact me about that as well. And I just want to help spread the word. So thank you so much, Angelo, for having me.
Thank you, Natalie. I know you have to run. I look forward to the next time. I'll give a 2-minute close, but I want you to be on time for what you have next. Look forward to the next time. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Everyone, I'm Angelo Robles, the host of the Angelo Robles podcast and the founder at Family Office Association. I too have a podcast, not as popular as Natalie's, on Spotify and Apple, and I also host a YouTube program. We're extremely active broadly in the world of family offices. It's not just limited to digital assets, as I more broadly call it, although that is an important and an increasing part, but there's many other issues that we cover: sovereign risk issues, creating and restructuring family offices, talent within the family office, etc. I tend to keep my YouTube platform more investing centric, so a heads up, but my members who join and are a part of Family Office Association, so it's familyofficeassociation.com, could certainly have a chance to learn more. I'm extremely active on social media. You could find me. Many of you already know the handles already. Thank you all for listening and viewing. Thank you all for our live audience. Sorry I couldn't get to more of the questions, but we had to do a little bit of an abbreviated version today. And again, Natalie Brunell, thank you so much.
Thanks so much. All the best.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.